Amahle Dlamini had 30 million rand in her handbag and a wound heading for her heart, though she knew only about the money. That Tuesday afternoon had begun so quietly that it seemed impossible for it to become the dividing line in a person's life. The sky over Johannesburg was pale and mild, the kind of sky that made the city look almost gentle. Amahle sat at her kitchen table with a mug of rooibos tea she had let go cold, staring through the window at the jacaranda tree outside and thinking about laundry, dinner, and whether she should remind her husband to pick up the dry cleaning on his way home. Nothing in the room suggested destiny. There was no music swelling in the background, no dramatic storm, no strange feeling in the air. Just a woman in a neat brick house, a quiet weekday, and a phone buzzing face down against the wood. She glanced at the screen and almost ignored it. Unknown number. Too formal-looking to be a friend, too persistent to be a wrong number. She answered with the cautious politeness of someone expecting a sales call. "Hello?" The man on the other end introduced himself in a calm, careful voice. His name was Peter Maseko, and he was calling from the National Lotto office. They had been trying to reach her for 2 days, he said. The words did not land all at once. She sat up slowly, one hand flattening against the table. A ticket had been purchased in her name 3 weeks earlier from a petrol station convenience counter in Rosebank. A standard draw ticket. He asked if she still had it. Amahle frowned. Of course she had bought one. She remembered now. She had been tired. The cashier had asked if she wanted to add a quick pick ticket, and she had almost said no. But then she had laughed and said, "Why not?" as if hope cost nothing when tucked behind a loaf of bread and milk. Peter Maseko asked her to remain calm. Then he told her the ticket had matched every number. At first she thought she had misunderstood him. People misunderstood life-changing news all the time. That was how the mind protected itself from shock. She stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. Her handbag hung on the back of the kitchen chair, and she pulled it toward her with clumsy fingers. She searched through receipts, lip balm, tissues, a half-used hand cream, and finally the thin paper slip appeared, bent slightly at one corner. Her mouth had gone dry. Peter read the numbers one by one. She checked them once, then twice, then a third time, because reality sometimes needed 3 chances to make itself believable. Each number matched. Not almost, not close enough to start dreaming. Exactly. The ticket trembled in her hand. "How much?" she whispered. There was a pause, and then he told her. 30 million rand. The room seemed to step back from her. The fridge hummed. A taxi hooted somewhere beyond the gate. The kettle on the counter reflected a small, warped version of her face. But everything felt far away, as if she had been moved behind glass and forced to look at the world from a distance. Peter continued speaking about verification, documents, appointments, and timelines. She tried to listen. She wrote down a reference number on the back of an electricity bill with a pen that first refused to work, then scratched into ink. When the call ended, she stood in the middle of her kitchen holding the ticket and breathing in short, shallow pulls. 30 million rand. Not in a fantasy. Not on television. Not in somebody else's miracle. In hers. She laughed once, but it came out sounding close to a sob. Then the sob became real. Tears rushed up before she could stop them. She leaned one hand against the counter, bowed her head, and cried the way people cry when joy is too large for the body to contain. For years, she and Sibusiso had stretched salaries, delayed repairs, postponed dreams. They had become experts in not now. Not now for the holiday. Not now for the bigger car. Not now for his business idea. Not now for helping her mother move somewhere safer and sunnier. Not now for almost everything. And then, suddenly, life had said yes. Her first thought was not of herself. It was of him. Sibusiso. Her husband of 12 years. The man with patient hands and tired eyes. The man who still apologized when he came home late, even if the delay was work. The man who once walked 3 blocks in the rain because he had given his umbrella to an old woman at a taxi rank. The man who had spent the past 2 years saying, when things settle down, about every dream he no longer expected to touch. Amahle pressed the ticket to her chest and smiled through tears. She could call him, of course. His name sat right there on her phone. She could hear his voice in seconds. She could listen to silence turn into disbelief and disbelief turn into laughter. But somehow that felt too small for news this big. She wanted to watch the moment happen on his face. She wanted to see him become lighter in real time. She wanted to be there when the burden of all their careful living fell off his shoulders. So she made a decision. She would drive to his office. She would surprise him. The idea delighted her instantly. She could already picture his expression. Confusion first, then curiosity, then the slow widening of his eyes. She imagined him standing, walking around his desk, taking her by both shoulders and asking if she was serious. She imagined the two of them laughing like children, maybe crying, maybe saying all the foolish, hopeful things adults stop saying out loud because life has trained them to be cautious. She tucked the ticket into the zipped inner pocket of her handbag as if she were placing a small beating heart in there. Then she grabbed her keys. Her car was 9 years old, white, reliable, and beginning to collect the kind of rattles that sound expensive. The left door had a scrape from a shopping center pillar she had misjudged 6 months ago. Normally, she noticed every flaw, because every flaw had a price tag attached. Today, she sat behind the wheel and laughed. Tomorrow, she could get it fixed. Tomorrow, she could replace the whole thing if she wanted. Tomorrow had become a word with a very different meaning. As she drove, she rehearsed. Amahle had never been good at holding surprises. Her face told the truth before her mouth did. Sibusiso always joked that if she ever tried to play cards professionally, they would be broke in a day. She practiced looking ordinary at red lights. She practiced a calm greeting. Maybe she would say she was in the neighborhood. Maybe she would hand him coffee first. Yes, coffee. He hated the bitter machine coffee in his office. He always said it tasted like regret and burnt wires. So she stopped at a cafe not far from his building and bought 2 takeaway cups. One for him, one for herself. She paid without really seeing the amount, and then stood there for a second, smiling at the absurdity of still accepting change while 30 million rand sat invisibly in her handbag. On the short drive from the cafe to his office, her mind raced ahead into the future. She thought of her younger sister, Tandiwe, still paying off old nursing school debt. She thought of her mother, Nomsa, living alone in a flat with peeling paint and stairs that hurt her knees. She thought of the township library near where she grew up, always running short on books, chairs, and funding. She thought of all the people she loved who had taught themselves to want less, because wanting more felt irresponsible. Maybe she and Sibusiso could change all of that. Maybe not overnight. Maybe not with foolish extravagance, but carefully, thoughtfully, beautifully. She parked in the underground garage beneath his building and checked her reflection in the mirror. She looked flushed, alive, electric. She tried to smooth her expression into something calmer. It did not help. Joy kept shining through. She took the lift to the lobby, coffee in hand, handbag tucked close. The security guard at the desk, an older man named Mr. Mokwena, recognized her immediately. He had seen her often over the years, bringing Sibusiso lunch, fetching him after late meetings, dropping off forgotten documents or chargers or jackets. He smiled and nodded. "Afternoon, Sisi Amahle." "Afternoon," she said, lifting the cups a little. "Just surprising my husband." "Ah," he said, grinning. "Then I have seen nothing." She laughed and crossed the polished floor toward the lifts. His office was on the 6th floor. She knew the building well enough that she no longer felt like a visitor there. She knew which lift opened faster, which hallway light flickered sometimes, which receptionist kept biscuits in her drawer and pretended not to. On the way up, she imagined again how she would tell him. Maybe she would let him complain about work first. Maybe she would wait until he sipped the coffee. Maybe she would say, "How would you feel if I told you we never have to worry like this again?" The lift doors opened. The first odd thing was small enough that she nearly missed it. The receptionist at the front desk, Zanele, looked up and startled very slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for the warmth on her face to arrive half a second late. "Amahle," she said. "Hi." "Hi, Zanele. Is Sibusiso in?" Zanele glanced down the corridor before answering. "Yes, he's in." There was nothing in the words that could be called a lie, yet something in the pause felt unfinished, like a sentence with its middle removed. Amahle was too bright with hope to study it. She smiled, thanked her, and walked on. The corridor was long, carpeted, and familiar. Framed prints hung on the wall. One of them showed a mountain at sunrise beside a quote about perseverance. Sibusiso hated that print. He said it looked like a threat dressed as inspiration. Amahle moved quietly, almost on tiptoe, enjoying the secret. His office was at the end, glass panel beside the door, blinds half closed for privacy during meetings. She was still smiling as she drew closer. Then she heard laughter, a woman's laughter. Soft, low, intimate in a way laughter is only intimate when it has forgotten the rest of the world exists. Amahle slowed, but not because she understood. Not yet. The mind resists disaster when it arrives in ordinary clothing. Offices had women in them. Women laughed. Men laughed. Colleagues shared private jokes all the time. It could be anything. Then she heard his voice. Not loudly. Not in the tone he used for presentations or formal calls. It was the quieter one. The one he brought home after dark. The one that belonged to evenings and bedsides and whispered conversations when the lights were off. She stopped. One more step would have placed her directly at the door. Instead, she stood there with 2 coffees warming her fingers through cardboard, while something inside her began to go still. She lifted her hand to knock. She did not knock, because the voices on the other side softened, slowed, dropped into a murmur. The kind of murmur that exists between 2 people who do not need to explain themselves to each other anymore. And then came a silence so full it was louder than the laughter had been. Her raised hand remained in the air. She told herself to move. Knock, she thought. Knock now. Walk in. Show him the ticket. Let this be an innocent misunderstanding and feel foolish later. But her body had already heard what her heart was refusing. The door opened. Only partly at first. The woman emerging did not see Amahle immediately. She was turned slightly back toward the room, smiling at something behind her. She was beautiful in a polished, effortless way, probably early 30s, wearing a fitted navy dress and confidence like perfume. Her hair was slightly loosened from what had once been a neat style. Her lipstick had softened at the edges. One hand held her phone, the other her blazer. Then she turned fully and froze. Color left her face so quickly it was almost brutal. Amahle looked past her into the office. Sibusiso sat perched on the edge of his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the posture of a man who had forgotten work hours and work boundaries. The smile on his face had not yet disappeared because he had not yet seen what the woman had seen. Then he followed her gaze. He looked at Amahle, and everything ended. No thunder, no shouting, no dropped cup exploding across the carpet the way it would have in a movie. Just three human beings held in a terrible stillness while truth stood among them without the courtesy to disguise itself. Amahle's eyes moved across her husband's face as if memorizing it for the last time. Shock came first, pure, involuntary, helpless. Then, calculation tried to arrive and could not settle because the moment was too raw. His mouth opened. Amahle. She lowered her eyes to the coffees in her hands. She had bought his exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a little milk, not too hot. She had carried it carefully because it had mattered to her that something about this surprise should feel tender and familiar. In her handbag, inches from her heartbeat, the winning ticket rested in darkness. 30 million rand. An hour earlier, it had felt like the opening of heaven. Now it felt like a cruel lamp switched on in the worst possible room. She looked back at him, then at the woman, then at him again. There were 100 possible scenes available to her in that moment. A slap, a scream, tears, questions. Names hurled like stones. She could have demanded explanations right there in the corridor, and perhaps both of them deserved the humiliation. Instead, something colder and clearer moved through her. She shook her head once. Not violently, not dramatically. Just once, as if refusing an offer that had come far too late. Then she turned and walked away. Her steps were steady, which shocked her. She expected to feel her knees fail. She expected the corridor to twist. But the body can become astonishingly disciplined when survival demands it. She moved past the ugly mountain print, past the reception desk where Zanelle pretended not to look up, past the place where hope had still existed 10 minutes earlier. When the lift doors opened, she stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. Only then did she breathe. Not deeply, not properly, but enough to keep standing. The mirrored walls of the lift reflected a woman who looked composed in a way she did not feel. Her face was pale, yes, and her eyes no longer bright. But she did not look shattered. She looked almost ordinary. That insulted her somehow. Catastrophe should at least have the decency to show itself on the skin. Halfway down, a thought appeared. Sibusiso did not know. He did not know about the money. He did not know about the phone call, the ticket, the reference number, the appointment, any of it. As far as he understood, his wife had simply turned up unexpectedly and discovered him. The realization slid into place with terrifying calm. When the lift reached the lobby, Amahle was no longer the same woman who had entered the building. Grief had arrived, yes, but beneath it, something sharper had awakened. Not revenge exactly, not yet. Something more useful than rage. Control. Mr. Mokoena looked up as she crossed the lobby. If he noticed anything strange, he was kind enough not to show it. She gave him a small nod and walked out into the late afternoon sun. She did not throw the coffees away immediately. She carried them all the way to the car, as if still finishing the role she had come to play. Only once she sat behind the wheel did she stare at them for several long seconds, then get out again, walk to a bin by the wall, and drop them in. The sound the cups made when they landed was very soft. She got back into the car and closed the door gently. That detail stayed with her later. The gentleness. She had not slammed it, had not even wanted to. Violence suddenly felt like a kind of surrender. She started the engine, fastened her seatbelt, and drove home obeying every traffic light as if the law of the road were the only stable thing left in the world. At one red light, she caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. She looked like a woman on her way back from an errand. That was when the first real tear fell. She wiped it away angrily, then laughed at her own anger. There was nobody there to witness dignity or lack of it. Still, she kept driving. She would not break down on Jan Smuts Avenue. She would not hand this pain to the city in public. She made it into the house. She locked the front door. She walked to the bedroom they had shared for 12 years and sat on the edge of the bed. Sibusiso's pillow was slightly indented from the morning. His book lay face down on the side table, spine bent in the middle where he had stopped reading 3 weeks ago. The ordinariness of those objects undid her more completely than the office had. She folded forward and cried. Not politely, not quietly. Not the restrained tears of television women whose mascara remains tasteful under pressure. She cried from the center of her body, shoulders shaking, breath breaking, hands over her face as if darkness could erase what her eyes had seen. She cried for the marriage, yes, but also for the self who had believed in it so completely. She cried for every meal they had eaten across from each other, without her knowing who else occupied his hidden hours. She cried for the version of love that had existed in her mind all these years and had now collapsed under its own false weight. Time passed. When the storm inside her finally eased, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Then, very slowly, she sat up. Her handbag was beside her where she had dropped it. She opened the inner zip and took out the lottery ticket. It looked absurdly small. This little slip of paper had become the hinge on which her whole future turned. She turned it over in her fingers and laughed once, but now the laugh was dry. The money was still real. Her husband's betrayal had not canceled the numbers. That mattered. She reached for her phone and found the email from the lotto office. She read it carefully this time. Claim procedure, verification, identity documents, banking details, appointment options. Everything was professional, clear, ordinary. The universe had done a cruel thing in timing, but not in administration. Whatever account she designated would receive the payout after approval. Whatever account she designated. Not their account. Not the account she shared with Sibusiso. Hers. She sat with that for a long while. Then another thought came, practical and immediate. He would come home tonight, prepared to explain. She knew him. He would be frightened, yes, and ashamed in whatever measure shame existed in him now. But Sibusiso had always had language. He could build logic around a mess until it resembled something livable. He would talk about mistakes, pressure, loneliness, a moment that went too far, something that did not mean what it looked like, something already ending, something he had meant to confess. He would try to reach the part of her that still loved him, and perhaps, if she let him speak before she thought clearly, some damaged, hopeful part of her might listen. That frightened her more than his affair. So she made herself a promise. He would not get to define the pace of what happened next. She washed her face, changed out of her blouse, and went downstairs. At the same kitchen table where life had opened and broken in one afternoon, she made fresh tea and opened her laptop. Her hands shook only once when she typed the words, "Best divorce attorney, Johannesburg, infidelity, asset protection." The search results appeared. She wrote down 3 names. She also wrote down the lotto reference number on a clean page, then took a photograph of the ticket and emailed it to a private address she used only for important documents. She was not a naturally suspicious woman. Today, she became one. By the time Sibusiso came home, night had settled over the street. His key turned in the front door at 7:18, later than usual, later than innocence could justify. Amahle was in the lounge with a book open on her lap. He entered, carrying yellow lilies, her favorite. He looked exhausted in that deliberate way guilt often looks exhausted. His eyes searched her face, bracing for impact. She could almost see the apology assembling itself behind them. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she answered. Her voice sounded normal. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He glanced at the flowers, then at her, as if unsure whether to approach. "We need to talk." "We do," she said, "but not tonight. I'm tired." He blinked. That was not the script he had prepared for. "Amahle." "Tomorrow," she said quietly. "Not tonight." For a moment he just stood there, holding the lilies like a man who had shown up late to a funeral with the wrong speech in his pocket. Then he nodded. "Okay." He went to the kitchen and put the flowers in water. She heard cupboard doors open and close, heard him choose the wrong vase first, then the right one. Heard the ordinary sounds of a marriage still pretending to be intact for one final evening. She turned a page in her book without reading a word. That night, he slept badly. She heard him turning, adjusting, breathing unevenly in the dark. Amahle lay very still beside him and stared into the blackness. The strange thing was not that she couldn't sleep. It was that she eventually did. Once she had made a plan, her mind unclenched enough to rest. In the morning, she went to work as usual. She answered emails. She attended a meeting. She smiled once at a joke she barely heard. On her lunch break, she called the first attorney on her list. Her name was Nandi Mokoena, and she had 30 years of family law experience and a voice that wasted no time on drama. The receptionist offered Amahle an appointment the following afternoon. At 2 p.m. the next day, Amahle sat in a quiet office with framed certificates on the wall and told a stranger the truth of her marriage in measured sentences. Husband, 12 years. No children. Shared property. Infidelity. Lottery win not yet disclosed. Emotional instability possible if confrontation mishandled. Nandi asked excellent questions. Did he know about the ticket? No. Was the ticket purchased with joint funds? No, with her own card while buying groceries. Had she already begun the claim process? Yes, partially. Did she have a personal bank account in her own name? Yes, one opened before marriage that she had kept because her mother had always insisted a woman should never fully disappear into shared finances. Nandi nodded at that. Your mother was wise, she said. By the end of the consultation, the fog in Amahle's head had thinned. She understood timelines. She understood legal exposure. She understood which steps should happen before confrontation and which after. She understood how to document assets, preserve evidence, and protect herself without theatrical gestures. Most importantly, she understood that she did not need to rush simply because pain wanted speed. She left the office carrying information, and information felt like solid ground. The next morning, she attended her lottery verification meeting. It took place in a modest corporate building with polite staff, forms to sign, ID copies to provide, and a seriousness that almost comforted her. No one there cared about the dramatic symbolism of her situation. To them, she was simply a claimant, a woman with a valid ticket and proper documents. Peter Maseko shook her hand, congratulated her warmly, and reviewed the remaining process. The payout would be transferred once final checks cleared. She provided the details of her personal account. When she walked out, sunlight fell across the pavement, and she stood for a moment with her face lifted toward it. The money had not arrived yet, but it was coming. Not as fantasy, as certainty. Around the same time, at home, Sibusiso had begun trying very hard. That was one of the hardest parts. He was gentle in the mornings, offered to make breakfast, asked if she needed anything, touched her elbow lightly when passing by in the hallway. He was not careless now. No, now he was attentive in the exact way a guilty man becomes attentive once consequence has entered the room. He looked at her often, as if measuring whether forgiveness had opened even a crack. Amahle gave him nothing to measure. She did not perform happiness. That would have been unbelievable. Instead, she performed a subtler state: fatigue, distance, quiet, the believable aftermath of hurt. She let him think she needed time to hear his explanation. She let him think the center of the storm was still emotional, not strategic. Meanwhile, she met a financial advisor recommended by Nandi. Her name was Lerato Kumalo, elegant, sharp-eyed, and impressively unsentimental about money. She spoke of wealth the way surgeons speak of delicate tissue, something useful, powerful, and dangerous in careless hands. She asked Amahle what she wanted from her future. Not what looked good, not what impressed others, what she actually wanted. Amahle answered more honestly than she expected. A home in her own name, security for her mother, relief for her sister, space to breathe without asking permission, perhaps time off work, then perhaps a different kind of work later. Something meaningful, maybe community literacy or women's enterprise support. She did not yet know. But for the first time in years, not knowing did not frighten her. It felt spacious. Lerato listened and began mapping possibilities. Trust structures, investments, cash reserves, property purchase sequencing, tax implications. Amahle took notes and felt, surprisingly, not overwhelmed but steadied. She had spent so much of adulthood making tiny decisions under pressure that large, careful decisions felt almost luxurious. Days passed, then a week. The house became a stage where two people played roles neither wanted to name. He waited for confession. She prepared for conclusion. In the middle of that strange week, she phoned her sister, Thandiwe. She did not tell her everything at first, just enough to hear another loving voice, enough to feel that her life still connected to something beyond betrayal and paperwork. Thandiwe listened with the patient seriousness of someone who already sensed there was more beneath the words. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you alone in this?" "No." "Do you need me?" Amahle's throat tightened. "Not tonight, but soon." "All right," Thandiwe said. "When you say come, I'm coming." They spoke for nearly an hour after that about ordinary things. Hospital shifts, rising grocery prices, their mother's stubbornness, a childhood memory involving stolen mangoes and a furious neighbor. When the call ended, Amahle sat with the phone in her lap and felt, for the first time since the office corridor, something warm and uncomplicated move through her. She was not abandoned. Not by life, not by love. Only by one man. Midway through the second week, the payout landed. Amahle was at her desk when the bank notification came through. She stared at the screen so long her colleague asked if she was all right. She nodded without looking up. The number filled the page in a way that seemed almost fictional, yet there it was, clean, official, irreversible. Her breathing changed. She excused herself, walked to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and sat down fully clothed with the phone in both hands. Not because she was faint, because the magnitude of it required privacy. She had thought the lottery call was the real moment. It wasn't. This was. The transformation from promised money to actual power. Power not to hurt him. Power not to beg. Power not to stay because leaving was unaffordable. She laughed once, then pressed her fingers against her eyes. That evening, she came home to find Sibusiso setting the table. He looked up with hope so cautious it was almost painful to watch. "I made stew," he said. "That was kind," she answered. During dinner, he spoke about work, about traffic, about an old friend he had run into. The whole time he was waiting for the moment when she might lower her guard enough for him to begin. She let him wait. There was no cruelty in it anymore, only order. She had learned something important in the past days. Silence used wisely is not weakness. It is architecture. On Saturday, she drove alone to view houses. The first was too cold. The second, too grand in a way that felt like costume jewelry on a life still healing. The third sat on a quiet street in Parkhurst, with white walls, wooden floors, a small study, and a garden that had not been fully cared for, but wanted to be loved. There was an old lemon tree near the back wall and a narrow stone path leading nowhere dramatic, just to a bench in partial shade. Amahle stood in the kitchen looking out at that garden and knew. Not because it was perfect, because it felt peaceful. No history in the corners. No betrayal in the walls. No memory hanging from the curtains. Just possibility. Just a future waiting to be arranged. She bought it. Not impulsively, carefully, through channels, in consultation, fully in her own name. When the papers were signed, she sat in her car outside the conveyancer's office, holding the new keys, and felt a surprising wave of emotion. Not triumph, not exactly. Something quieter. The sensation of a woman returning to herself through practical means. That Sunday night, she finally told Thandiwe everything. Every piece. The lottery call. the coffees, the corridor, the woman, the flowers, the lawyer, the money, the new house. When she finished, there was silence on the line. Then Tandiwe exhaled slowly and said, "My sister, I am so proud of you." Amahle closed her eyes. No one had said that to her in quite that way for a long time. "I'm proud of me too," she whispered. And because it was true, the words steadied her even more. By the third week, she was ready. She chose a Sunday morning for the conversation because Sundays had once belonged to them. In the early years of marriage, Sunday mornings had been soft with shared routines. No alarm, slow breakfast, radio playing somewhere. One of them reading headlines aloud while the other complained about coffee strength. If a marriage has a sacred room inside it, theirs had been Sunday mornings. So she decided that was where it would end. She woke first and made coffee. Not elaborate coffee, just the familiar kind. She set 2 mugs on the kitchen table and then placed a plain brown folder between them. Inside were the documents Nandi had prepared, along with a concise property summary, legal notes, and an initial proposed arrangement generous enough to deny him the comfort of painting himself as the victim later. When Sibusiso entered, he looked at the folder first, then at her face. He had been waiting for this day. She could see the readiness in him. He had spent nearly 2 weeks rehearsing remorse. He believed the conversation ahead would be difficult, but still somehow centered on his explanation. He sat down slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk." "Yes," Amahle said. "Let's." She wrapped both hands around her mug, took one sip, and set it down carefully. "3 weeks ago, the afternoon I came to your office, I received a call from the National Lotto." He frowned, not yet understanding why that mattered. "The ticket I bought at the garage matched every number." She held his gaze. "I won 30 million rand, Sibusiso." He stared at her. The silence that followed was complete enough to hear the faint tick of the clock above the microwave. His face moved through several emotions so quickly that each one interrupted the next. Confusion, shock, wonder. Then a more complicated expression, one that looked almost like fear wearing a better suit. 30 million? He said. Yes. He sat back. His mouth opened slightly, then shut. He looked at her as if the room had shifted around him without permission. "My God," he said quietly. "Amahle, that's unbelievable." "It is." He reached toward her hand instinctively, then seemed to remember who she was and who he had been when she last stood in front of him. His hand hovered, then returned to his side. "This changes everything," he said. Amahle studied him for a long second. "Yes," she answered. "It does." She opened the folder and turned it toward him. He looked down, read the heading on the top document, and changed. The softness left his face. The hope went with it. What remained was naked disbelief, the particular expression of a person who realizes the discussion they prepared for no longer exists. "These are divorce papers." "Yes." He looked up sharply. "You already filed?" "Not yet," she said. "I wanted to tell you first. Then my attorney will proceed." "Your attorney?" "Yes." His eyes dropped to the folder again, then to the neat typed pages beneath. She watched him understand, piece by piece, that the days he had spent waiting for her emotional collapse had instead been used to build a careful exit he could not easily dismantle. "You've been planning this." "I've been thinking clearly," she said. "Amahle, please." His voice roughened. "Please don't do this like this. Let me explain." She shook her head gently. "I know you have an explanation." "It wasn't. I'm sure parts of it are even true," she said. "That's not the point." He stared at her, stunned by the calm in her voice. It was not theatrical calm, not icy for effect. It was worse for him than anger. It was the calm of a woman who had already carried the fire through herself and found something solid on the other side. "It mattered to me," she continued, "that you had a chance to hear this directly from me. That's why I'm telling you now. But I don't need the explanation to make my decision." He ran a hand over his face. "Amahle, you came to tell me that day, didn't you? At the office. You were coming to tell me." "Yes." His shoulders dropped as if a rope had been cut inside him. "And instead you found—" "Yes." He covered his eyes with one hand and sat like that for several seconds. When he looked up again, they were wet. "I am sorry," he said. And for the first time, she believed him. Not because sorry fixed anything. It did not. Not because he had earned mercy. He had not. But because this version of his apology did not sound curated. The rehearsed one had probably died the moment she mentioned the money. What remained now was smaller and uglier and real. "I know," she said. He looked at the folder again. "The money. Where is it?" "In my account." "Your own account?" "Yes." He absorbed that silently. Then, in a voice almost childlike with injury, he asked, "So that's it? After 12 years? That's it?" Amahle took a slow breath. "No," she said. "Not after 12 years. After what happened to 12 years. He closed his eyes. The sentence landed. She saw it. "I'm not trying to destroy you," she continued. "You'll be treated fairly. The lawyers will handle the details. I'm not interested in spectacle. I'm interested in peace." He laughed once, a broken sound. "Peace." "Yes." He looked around the kitchen as though seeing it for the first time. The mugs, the curtains she had chosen, the bowl of fruit on the counter. The life that had quietly been made by two people over more than a decade. "I never thought," he began, then stopped. "You never thought I would leave?" she asked. He did not answer. That was answer enough. She stood and carried her mug to the sink. From there she looked out through the window at the small backyard where they had once stood in the rain, arguing about whether to plant herbs. The memory came and went without pain sharp enough to knock her over. That surprised her. "I'm staying with my sister for a few days," she said. "After that, I'll move into my new house." He turned sharply. "Your new house?" "Yes." For a moment, he simply looked at her, and the full shape of reality entered him at last. It was no longer only that his wife had discovered his betrayal. It was that in the exact same season, she had acquired the freedom to build a future that did not have to include him, and she had chosen to use it. He stood up too quickly, chair scraping. "Amahle, please. Please. Don't make permanent decisions while you're hurt." She turned and faced him.
This was the last important moment, she understood. The final place where the old version of herself might once have softened, defended him, delayed the inevitable because his pain touched her. But the woman standing in that kitchen had changed. "I'm not making this decision because I'm hurt," she said. "I'm making it because now I can see clearly." He had no answer to that. So they stood there, two people with 12 years behind them and no road ahead, together, while morning sunlight spread slowly across the kitchen tiles. At last, she picked up her handbag.
"I hope one day you become honest enough to be worthy of the next person who trusts you," she said. He flinched, as if struck. Then she walked past him, through the hallway, out the front door, and into the mild Sunday air. She did not look back. Thandiwe opened the door before she knocked, as if she had been standing there waiting. She took one look at Amahle's face, dropped all attempts at cheerful greeting, and simply pulled her into an embrace. That was when Amahle cried again. Not the wrecking cry from the bedroom weeks earlier. This was gentler, more exhausted, almost grateful. The crying of someone who has completed a hard, necessary thing and finally reached a place where she can put down the weight for an hour. Inside, Thandiwe had made tea already. Real tea, in mugs too large to be elegant. They sat at the table, and Amahle told her everything that had happened that morning. Thandiwe listened, swore at the appropriate moments, cried once herself, then recovered and asked sensible questions about lawyers, accounts, property transfer, timelines, and personal security. Practical love, Amahle thought, might be the most healing kind. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were clean. There were legal meetings, valuation forms, signatures, account statements, and conversations carried through attorneys rather than directly. Sibusiso, to his credit or perhaps to his shame, did not become vindictive. Maybe he knew too well what moral ground he lacked. Maybe he had looked into the mirror of what he had done and found the reflection unbearable. Whatever the reason, he cooperated. Amahle was grateful for that, though gratitude did not soften her decision. She moved into the new house on a bright Wednesday morning with 2 hired movers, her sister, 3 potted plants, and a silence she had expected to feel lonely. It did not feel lonely. It felt wide. The rooms were empty at first, in the way all beginnings are empty. Her footsteps echoed. The curtains had not yet been hung. Boxes lined the walls like unopened chapters. But when she stood alone in the kitchen and set her keys on the counter, peace moved through her so steadily that she had to sit down. This house did not know her heartbreak. It knew only her arrival. She furnished it slowly, thoughtfully, not to prove wealth, but to support life. A deep couch where she could read, a proper bed, good locks, warm lamps, a desk facing the garden, shelves for books. She repaired the cracked paving stones, hired a gardener to help bring order back to the neglected patch at the rear. The old lemon tree stayed. She liked that it had survived neglect and still offered fruit. She helped Thandiwe quietly, paid off the student debt, set up an education fund for her niece and nephew, covered a car repair Thandiwe had postponed for 8 months because there was always something more urgent. When Thandiwe cried, Amahle pretended not to notice for a minute, so her sister could collect herself with dignity. She moved her mother, Nomsa, into a brighter flat with an elevator, safer locks, and a balcony where the sun stayed in the mornings. The day they collected the keys, Nomsa walked slowly from room to room, touching walls, windows, and cupboard handles, as if testing whether kindness was allowed to become real. "You don't have to do all this," she said, voice trembling. "I know," Amahle answered. "I want to." Her mother took her hand and held it for a long time without speaking. Amahle also gave money where she had once only wished she could. The library in her old neighborhood received books, furniture, and internet access support through a foundation set up discreetly. A women's shelter got funding for emergency beds and legal aid. She did not put her name everywhere. Not every act of giving needs applause to count. As months passed, she learned that wealth does not automatically turn a wounded life into a happy one. That is not how healing works. Money can remove certain forms of fear, and that is no small gift. It can buy safety, privacy, time, better options, therapy, a stronger roof, and a ticket out of dependence. But it cannot do the emotional labor for you. It cannot grieve in your place. It cannot teach your heart to trust time again. Amahle understood this, and because she understood it, she used her money better than many people might have. She began therapy. She traveled alone for the first time in her life, not to escape herself, but to meet herself somewhere new. In Zanzibar, she sat on a balcony overlooking the ocean and discovered that solitude, when freely chosen, tastes nothing like abandonment. In the Drakensberg, she hiked a simple trail at dawn and felt her body belong entirely to her again. In Kigali, she walked through quiet museums and remembered that human beings survive things larger than heartbreak every day and still choose tenderness after. Sibusiso wrote twice. The first letter was a proper apology, not manipulative, not defensive. She read it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. The second came after the divorce was finalized. He said he did not expect forgiveness, only hoped she had found peace. She did not answer either letter. Silence was no longer a weapon now. It was simply the correct distance. One evening, nearly a year after the day of the office corridor, Amahle stood in her own garden with damp soil on her hands and the smell of lemon leaves in the air. The sun was going down gold and slow across the wall. Her niece chased a ball near the bench. Inside the house, her mother and sister were arguing affectionately over whether too much garlic could ever really exist. Someone's laughter floated out through the open kitchen window. Amahle looked around and understood something she had been slowly learning for months. She had not been saved by luck alone. Yes, the lottery had changed the scale of her options. That mattered. But the deeper transformation had come from what she chose in the hours after her heart broke. She chose not to explode where she would later have to stand in the ashes. She chose not to hand her future to the man who had damaged her. She chose patience over spectacle, clarity over panic, structure over collapse. She chose herself with both hands. And that, more than the money, was what rebuilt her life. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, she made tea and sat by the kitchen window. The lemon tree moved gently in the dark breeze. The room around her reflected her choices in 100 small ways. Every cup, every curtain, every light, every shelf. Nothing had been arranged to accommodate dishonesty. Nothing required shrinking. She smiled into her cup. The old house had once felt like the center of her world. Now it felt like a chapter from a book she had loved honestly and left with respect. Some endings arrive as noise. Others arrive as knowledge. Her ending had come disguised as both blessing and betrayal on the same Tuesday afternoon. But what followed had become something neither one alone could have created. Not simply loss, not simply fortune. Freedom. Real freedom. The kind built from truth, courage, paperwork, prayer, tears, bank forms, legal advice, sisterhood, and the stubborn decision to keep your dignity when life gives you every reason to throw it across a corridor floor. Amahle lifted her tea and drank it while it was still hot. And this time, in the soft lamplight of a home that belonged only to her, she understood that the richest part of her life had never been the 30 million rand. It was the day she realized she no longer had to stay where love had stopped being honest.